It is now time to turn the proceedings over to Tom Jessel, who will be leading the discussion among our brilliant interdisciplinary group of Columbia faculty. Tom is the Claire Tao Professor of Motor Neuron Disorders in Neuroscience and Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Biophysics. For more than 25 years, he has been a fixture at Columbia, an irreplaceable colleague who has helped to chart the future of the university's study of the brain and human behavior. There is no one better equipped to serve, along with Eric Kandel and Richard Axel, as director of the Zuckerman Institute, nor is there anyone better suited to lead this panel of extraordinary clinicians and scholars who will provide a small glimpse of the promise we celebrate today because of Mort Zuckerman. It is a collection of Columbia faculty that includes 2 Nobel laureates. At least that's the present tally. Who knows how many more we will count among this group in the coming years. Tom and colleagues.
Lee, as always, thank you for many things, but I hope that you will excuse me today if I deliver a significantly larger thank you to Mort Zuckerman for creating an institute that has inspired the entire university. And this thank you comes not only from myself, but from my co-directors, Eric Kandel, Richard Axel, but from the entire Columbia community, from the most distinguished senior professor to the Columbia College freshmen who just can't contain themselves from their enthusiasm for probing issues of brain and mind. Your endorsement, I think, arguably has created perhaps the most exciting scientific venture in an academic setting anywhere in this country and beyond. And what you have done is given us the confidence and enthusiasm, not only to try and explore the inner workings of the brain, but try and link that to issues of mind and perhaps even to the human condition itself. And if André Malraux was here today, he might say, be inspired to say that what you've done is given us a mandate to probe man's fate. So today, December the 17th, 2012, I will always think of as Z-Day from now on, a pivotal time in Columbia's aspirations of neural science, brain and mind. And to try and reflect and consider on what you've established and achieved, we've assembled a group of people which, as near as I can see, gets to Columbia's collective conscience and consideration. I just want to introduce everybody who's up here with me. So, as you might expect, my co-directors muscled their way into the action. We have university professors Richard Axel and Eric Kandel. But in addition, we have Ken Ford, over on your right there, clinician, doyen, surgeon, and now Columbia trustee. And no one, I think, has a better perspective on how to blend the aspirations of basic research with the clinical demands. And so we're delighted to have Ken here. Geraldine Downey from the School of Arts and Sciences is a psychologist, a social scientist. Geraldine understands people and personalities, which is not a bad thing around Columbia to have someone with that perspective. Elizabeth Hillman, physicist turned biomedical engineer turned explorer of brain imaging, is almost single-handedly establishing the links between the School of Engineering and what the Zuckerman Institute tries to represent. And David Strauss, psychiatrist, clinician, and someone who has been giving us sage advice how to place emphasis appropriately on the clinical outcome of the research that will go on in your institute. And so I want to begin this discussion, and it's supposed to be light and informal despite being in the glare of spotlight here, with Eric Kandel, because I think arguably, as you've heard this morning, everything that's happening today can be ascribed in one way or another to events that happened, let's say, 35 years ago when Eric decided to move his research group from NYU, New York University, to Columbia, bringing to Columbia for the first time this newly emerged coherent discipline called neuroscience or neurobiology. And since then, Eric's own research program has gone from strength to strength in a very evident way. But more than that, I think Eric, more than anybody, represents the diversity of information and import in neuroscience. Eric's own interests range from molecular reductionism to cognitive psychiatry. And if that's not enough, Eric has single-handedly taken upon himself to try and address the two-culture divide articulated by C.P. Snow of bringing brain and mind to the problems of the humanities. And if you haven't read The Age of Insight, you're missing a treat there, and I would recommend that. But also, as you heard, in terms of his attempt to explain issues of brain and mind to a general audience through the Charlie Rose Show and many other ventures, Eric is the complete neurobiologist, neuroscientist. So perhaps we should start, Eric, with you providing your thoughts about the Zuckerman Institute, its potential, but perhaps also with a nod to the events that have taken us here today. Eric.
Tom, I have nothing to add to what you said.
All right, you've had your chance then, so we'll...
I join my voice to that of others in thanking you for what you've done for Columbia and for the country. As Tom Jessel indicated, I was recruited here in 1974 to help build neuroscience at this university. And my task was enormously facilitated when, a few years after I arrived, I met Richard Axel. He was already an extremely accomplished molecular biologist, and he was becoming interested in the brain. I was a brain scientist, and I knew nothing about molecular biology. So we began to talk, and we started to collaborate. We brought together behavior, brain science, and molecular biology. This was a very productive and enjoyable collaboration, and it caught the attention of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. In 1980, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute began to think of supporting brain science. It started a national review to see which universities it should support, and Columbia came out #1. In 1983, we became a Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And the first thing we did was to recruit Tom Jessel from Columbia in 1985. And the rest, as Lee pointed out, is history. But it really is history, because today we're entering a new phase, a new turning point in brain science at Columbia. Mort Zuckerman's extraordinary and far-sighted gift has placed Columbia in a position to really take the Mind-Brain Behavior Initiative, named after you, and produce a paradigm shift in how brain science is practiced by connecting it to other components of the intellectual enterprise. This is really Lee Bollinger's vision, the vision that he brought here. He thought brain science is central to the academic enterprise because, in a certain sense, everybody at the university works on one or another aspect of mind. Let me put this paradigm shift into perspective for you by pointing out that this is not the first time that a new development in biology has led to unification of knowledge. To remind you, in 1953, Watson and Crick produced a paradigm shift by deciphering the double helical nature of DNA and giving us a deep understanding of the nature of the gene. This allowed molecular biology to produce a paradigm shift that unified the different components of biology that were previously separate. Cell biology, biochemistry, genetics, immunology, and even biology of nerve cells were now incorporated into a common intellectual enterprise. That was the task of the second half of the 20th century. The challenge, the universal challenge for the 21st century, is to understand the mind and its disorders in biological terms. But in a larger sense, we not only want to understand the nature of the human mind and its diseases, but we also want to use that to put us in a position to ask a range of questions that link brain science to other areas of knowledge, to link it to other sciences, and to link it to the humanities and to the social sciences. Thus, one might hope that in the 21st century, we would come close to accomplishing for the understanding of the enormous complexity of the brain, the degree to which we achieved an enormous understanding of the gene in the 20th century. Let me just outline in a series of bullets some possible long-term aspirations of the Zuckerman Mind-Brain Behavior Initiative as a collaborative source for new knowledge. In each case, we see this as a collaboration which brain science would gain from interacting with another discipline, as well as perhaps edifying some components of that new discipline. Take the example of law. We would like to know what is the nature of free will and of personal responsibility. In economics, there are people in this room who have pioneered the biology of decision-making and of choice. With sociology, which is a field that was extraordinary 50 years ago, has slowed down a little bit. Biological insights could help bring a new dimension to that field, the nature of group behavior, social affiliation, the biology of aggression. With psychology, we're beginning to make some slight headways in understanding the biology of consciousness, the nature of memory and its disorders. With art, how does a viewer respond to a work of art? What is the nature of different kinds of creativity? With engineering, new brain-computer interfaces, new ways of imaging the human brain, new models of behavioral states. With psychiatry, the biological base of psychiatric disorder, schizophrenia, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the irrational violence that Mayor Bloomberg alluded to. These are the sort of things that I hope the Mort Zuckerman Mind-Brain Behavior Initiative will try to accomplish in the 21st century, and this is what we owe to Mort's prophetic vision.
Eric, thank you. So Eric raises many issues here, which I just want to pick up on. And so the first thing, Mort, truth in advertising, is that we, under Lee's directive, are trying to do something quite ambitious here. We're trying to take a core expertise in understanding and probing brain function and explore. This is, after all, a brain, mind, and behavior institute. And those aspects of mind and behavior are represented throughout the university, particularly in arts and sciences. And so this, traditionally, the aspects of mind have been the pursuit of psychologists and philosophers. That's the mind of the individual. And minds of crowds are now attracting attention, even in departments as seemingly disparate as the Department of Economics. And no one has done more to try and set the stage for the links between arts and science and the core neural group than Geraldine Downey. And so, Geraldine, I'd like to get your thoughts and challenges on what we have to achieve if we're going to meet Mort's pressing demand that we solve all of these problems in the next 5 years, which I think we heard earlier today. So this is all on you now, Geraldine.
What I'm going to say is that psychology views itself, as does neuroscience, as the discipline that studies mind, brain, and behavior. And this is the very first time in history that these two disciplines, who've tended to move along somewhat independently, and at Columbia in geographically disparate areas that we don't seem to traverse very well, this is the first time that we are at a point when these disciplines can be integrated. And now we're at a point where we can study along the full continuum from cell to society what's involved in fully understanding mind, brain, and behavior. Eric has told you why this is so important to do. And the events, the tragic events in Connecticut bring this home to us. Elizabeth Hillman, our physicist turned engineer, has told me to remind you that this integration is made possible by technology. And in particular, the technological development that has linked the understanding of the brain in terms of cells and cell circuits with the understanding of the mind, which we in psychology and our colleagues in philosophy and in the social sciences and beyond in Columbia consider our domain. this has been made possible by the technological developments that have led to imaging, the ability to look at the human brain as it's living in a non-invasive way, and to take pictures of us as we are feeling the pain of others, as we are deciding not to eat that cookie or to eat it, as we make decisions about what romantic partners to pursue, as we make decisions about where to invest our money, as we make decisions about which holiday gifts to buy or not. So the imaging has made this possible. It's really not yet at a point that you would think it was if you know about imaging from watching Law and Order, or from watching House or Lie to Me, which I obviously do. But the kinds of revolutions that are going to happen in physics and in engineering will make us do it better, be able to do the kind of things that we need to do technologically, to integrate the study of the mind and the brain as it pertains to human behavior.
Thank you, Geraldine. So Geraldine is, in a sense, issuing this challenge that we need to understand human behavior in its most intricate form and to explain that at a level that can be related to brain and circuits and even neurons and molecules. And this is a big, big challenge. And I just want to emphasize the ambitious scope of what we're trying to achieve here. And in that context, it's important to realize that none of this would happen. None of us on the stage would actually be in the position we're in today were it not for the support of the university as a whole at the very highest level, from Lee and from the trustees driving this ambition forward. So the Zuckerman Institute exists not only because of some of the scientists, but because the university as a whole has seized this as an opportunity. And Ken Ford represents, I think, in part, the voice of the university in his position as a trustee, but also, as I stare across this group at Ken, looking at his admonitory gaze in terms of turning basic science into something that he can relate to in terms of clinical practice. So Ken, we'd be interested in your thoughts on this venture from your dual perspective.
So as Tom said, I'm here, as Shakespeare would say, in double trust. First of all, as having been privileged to be a member of the Board of Trustees of this great university, I can tell you that your trustees are overwhelmingly enthusiastic and appreciative of what this augurs for the future of mankind, humankind, and understanding many aspects of our behavior, how they're brought about, the basic science. It helps the university fulfill its mission in areas from research to education to patient care to public policy. So we recognize this as a unique day and time for this great university. We also recognize that having an institute such as this makes it very attractive for outstanding scholars who are interested in this area to want to join colleagues whom they think and know are in the forefront, in the vanguard of research in neuroscience. So strategically, this is very important for us as a university. It is also a challenge for this to be a model for those who cluster in other disciplines, whether it be around organs of the body or specific sciences, to find ways to communicate more effectively and efficiently. And also, as a trustee and interested in the entire university, we recognize that much of the talent in Morningside Heights needs to meet with the talent in Washington Heights to further strengthen our entire university, and the Mind-Brain Behavior Institute will offer us this opportunity. And And having spent several decades here as a faculty member and having taken care of many patients as a surgeon and in the teaching of surgery, I can tell you that I've recognized that as we've become more and more specialized and super specialized and expert, which is all good and beneficial to all of us, we've developed a sort of a silo system in which we sometimes, for various reasons, don't get together, communicate as much as we ought to. And I think it's time for us to come back together, not necessarily to be all in the same discipline, but to share ideas and vision and thoughts and dreams and frustrations and hopes. And I think the Mind-Brain Behavior Institute will give us this opportunity. Those of us uptown, as we say, certainly recognize that neuroscience has been one of the jewels in Columbia's crown. And for this jewel to glitter more brilliantly is something that we owe a lot for the visionary of philanthropy that you see here today. We anticipate that individuals from across the university will be challenged to come together to unite now that we have a physical structure and some organization to support it and some endowment to keep it going, that they will come together to work more efficiently in solving many of the issues that beset us. And I think on a more fundamental level, this institute has the opportunity to help us understand things like, how do we teach? How do we learn? How do we deal with happiness and wellness, but also with despair and disability? And so I think this is a special day, the opening of a new era, if you will, and we thank you again, Mr. Zuckerman, for your generosity.
Thanks, Ken. I think listening to Ken, he emphasizes this idea that the Zuckerman Institute is going to provide a protection from the ravages of everyday academic life. What we want to try and engender in this Green Science Center building, in the Institute, is a way in which people can stop and relax and take a breath and think and talk to people outside their disciplines. And so I think, Ken, you're sort of asking for something which is maybe a throwback to 50 or 60 years ago. And when I think about what we're trying to achieve with the Zuckerman Institute and the Green Center, we're trying to go back to those days, perhaps on the West Coast, when the Salk Institute was being established, and when people, thinkers like Jacob Bronowski, were devoting their time to try and engage in the genuine pursuit of science, but in a social, societal context. And I think we have the opportunity, with your generosity and with the collective weight of the university, of really striving to achieve that goal. And this is one of the things that I think drives me on. Now, having said that, it is important to point out that even though the hopes and aspirations for neuroscience are extremely high around here, there are a lot of things we don't know. There are a lot of even basic approaches to interrogating thousands or millions of groups of neurons that are working collectively during a network that is controlling a behavior. And in the past, what has driven the field forward in ways that one couldn't have appreciated at any given point of time is technology. So even today, more than ever, we need new technologies applied to these problems of cognition and brain and mind. And so one of the things we're enthusiastic about through the establishment of the Institute is beginning discussions with many other groups within the university, particularly the School of Engineering, who are used to thinking about technical advances and how to improve things. How can we sample tens of thousands of neurons in real time during a behavior? And we view Elizabeth as the first step in this dialogue. And Elizabeth, you're going to tell us, in a sense, from your perspective as physicist and engineer, how we should be thinking about these problems and the emergence of technology with biology.
Right. So, I mean, like you said, it's all about engineering, right? Now, technology really is the cornerstone of neuroscience, and you can't walk into a neuroscience lab without seeing wires and technology everywhere, all around you, even MRI scanners. So where are we with those things? You know, MRI now can let you actually image the thinking brain, but it can't let you monitor someone as they're walking around, as they're having social interactions, as they're actually doing their behaviors. So that's a huge technological leap that we need to make. You know, we can read out from a single neuron using an electrode. We can do 5 neurons, 10, maybe 50, but we want to do 100, 1,000, or 100,000. Right, and we want to be able to image all of those, again, you know, in these difficult environments. And all of those take really serious technology. So, you know, we need the electrical engineers, we need the biomedical engineers, we need the chemical engineers to help us find the contrast agents or the genetic fluorescent proteins, all of those things to allow us to gather that data to sort of read out this information from this really complex machine in our heads. And then what are we going to get? We're going to get loads and loads and loads of data, and then we have to do something with that data. Even storing that data is difficult, but analyzing that data, visualizing that data, doing modeling on that data to really understand what it's trying to tell us is a huge, huge challenge. And that's really a core strength of computer scientists, of applied physicists and applied mathematicians. And we have all of those here at SEAS, but you know, we can really move that forward into a new generation. And you know, one of the things is that technologies, science and technology is becoming much, much more interdisciplinary. You're really getting people, not just one discipline meeting another, but people who personify that intersection between 2 different fields or 3 different fields. And one of the really important things to be really at the leading edge is that those technologies have to be developed together in parallel. You can't just adopt somebody else's technique. That technique, if it's developed with the particular question in mind, will be, you know, that much more fantastic. And so the ability that the Zuckerman Institute will give us to do this under the same roof for technology developers like myself to be working side by side with visionary neuroscientists to make those technologies come together will really be unprecedented. And one other thing I'll say is that a lot of these technologies that have arisen in the last few years, the fluorescent proteins, the optogenetics, all of these new technologies, have also translated into other fields that have had big impacts on other areas of medicine or cancer and so on. And so, you know, those technological advances that are often driven by neuroscience have huge impact on other areas as well. And that's really critical. And I think this panel also personifies how those things are going to push out into the broader community.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think I just want to emphasize more that even though the home of this initiative or institute is still some 3.5 years away, what you've created and what is happening now, it's happening today and it's happening now within the university. So we have this interesting opportunity of 2 or 3 years of discussion and rehearsal of which themes should be emphasized within the institute, within the Green Center. And so by the time the Green Center becomes an existence, hopefully many of these dialogues which hadn't happened remarkably in the university in the preceding 2 decades are actually happening now. So there's an immediacy about this, and the impact is being felt, I think, university-wide at the moment. So in Greek mythology, the titan of the intellect was called Koios. He was the guardian of the axis of heaven. And when I think of Richard Axel, this immediately springs to mind. In my 27 years at Columbia, I have operated within a stone's throw of Richard, and you have to be careful what you wish for, but I could have wished for nothing else. And Richard has a Columbian through and through, from Columbia College through molecular biology to his current incarnation as cognitive neuroscientist. He, Phoenix-like, has the capacity to reinvent his science every 7 years from the ashes that he left behind before. And so Richard has this rather unique perspective on everything Columbian. And I don't know what he's going to say, but I'm sure it's going to be informative and wise. Richard.
I'm thinking. Thank you, Tom. So it seems that, pardon me, it seems that we've been talking about the brain. And the brain is unquestionably the most complex structure in our universe. And the study of the brain is perhaps the most profound and important endeavor of mankind. But there's a problem. We don't understand it. We simply do not understand it. One of the temptations of having a mind is that we try and use it to deduce the mystery of its own nature. This indeed is the goal of the Zuckerman Institute within the Green Center, and we thank you for it. Indeed, it is tempting to think that we can understand the mind by thinking alone. This has been tried. Philosophers have done this from the beginning of recorded history. Philosophers have been joined by historians, artists, psychologists, sociologists, mathematicians, physicists, even biologists. But what's clear is that the mind does not lend itself to verbal description. Indeed, the history of the study of the mind has a long tradition of ignoring biology. And what we in the Institute wish to argue is a new era in which there is a new union, a merger between the humanities, the more quantitative sciences, mathematics and physics, and experimental and theoretical biology to try and crack this magical structure. Now, let me try and explain very quickly the nature of the complexity, the reason this astonishing structure is so elusive. I came to neuroscience, as Eric pointed out, from genetics. I came as a brazen, young, successful geneticist with the notion that an understanding of the genes that run in a neuron would, as this understanding did in a liver, provide for us an understanding of how it is that brains work in much the same way that an understanding of liver cells would teach us how livers work, or heart cells would teach us how a heart works. Didn't work out. And it didn't work out because it became very clear that genes don't control behavior. Neurons don't control behavior. Nervous systems control behavior. And nervous systems consist of this vast collection, these vast ensembles of neurons. In man, billions of neurons with trillions of connections. And it is these ensembles of neurons that actually represent emotion, perception, memory, action. And so herein lies the problem. Ensembles of neurons control these higher order functions. But the brain abstracts all of these higher order functions. The brain abstracts memory. It abstracts the way we perceive the world. It abstracts our intention to act. Because the brain translates these higher order notions into the firing, the activity of neurons. And so this is a total abstraction. And it's like modern art at some level. In abstract art, what the artist does is to take a very clear representative image of the world and then transform its lines, its colors, into something whose meaning can only be discerned by learning, by association. And so our task is to try and understand the meaning of this abstraction. Now, most people, when they think about how it is that the brain can actually view a visual image, take something simple like a triangle, might believe that somewhere in our brains, in a visual part of our brain, we have an array of neurons that fire in the shape of a triangle. No, we have an ensemble of neurons that bears no resemblance to a triangle, and somehow we have a code which converts that into a triangle. We don't know how that works. People think about memory as if the brain is somehow playing out a movie, that the frames of the past, one after another, pass in front of you. That's not how it works at all. We don't know how it works because the brain is using a language to interpret, to read this ensemble of neurons. So, this is a difficult problem. It's a problem, as I said earlier, that will require the merger of many disciplines, of both the humanities, of mathematics, physics, and experimental neuroscience. But most importantly, it's going to require new and creative thinking. We, the aged neuroscientists, look forward to this institute, look forward to watching new ideas and young minds try and address this problem. The solution will be magical. It will be enchanting. And even in science, without enchantment, there is nothing. Thank you.
Richard is an example of a human being where the gene for self-satisfied accomplishment has been deleted, and he stands as an example to us all. So more simply put, your institute is trying to do two things, I think. One is to understand, and two is to apply that understanding for the greater good. And in the context of brain and mind, the greater good means addressing problems in the realm of neurological and psychiatric disorders. And so David Strauss, one of the great things about being involved in this venture is to meet people that existed in your world but you'd never talked to. And David has been a fantastic contributor to thinking about how the clinical mandates of psychiatry and neurology can be melded with this drive for basic research. So David.
Thanks, Tom. It's really an honor to be here. You know, when Tom asked that I speak about what some of the challenges or even outcome measures might be for the Zuckerman Institute, my first thought was actually to reflect back on a clinical interaction I had last week with the patient and her family. She was a 20-year-old college student, a sophomore. She recently had experienced for the first time delusions and hallucinations. And as I sat there with her parents, I watched as they worked up the nerve to ask some questions that many simply are afraid to ask. They said, is this schizophrenia? Is what she has schizophrenia? Will she be able to finish college? Will she have friends again? Will she have a family of her own? Will she need to take these medications for the rest of her life? And then last and haltingly, will she ever be the daughter that we used to know? So it's important for me to think about schizophrenia and the tragic inadequacy of current approaches to diagnosis and treatment, even amid these astonishing successes that we've had in brain science. It's impossible not to think about Alzheimer's, about autism, about depression, about the number of Americans that die each year by suicide, about traumatic brain injury, substance use, and many others. It's important, as Geraldine referred to before, to also think about the many preventable medical illnesses, conditions that can be avoided or modified through behavior change if we were only smarter at how to do that. So, to me, the potential exists for the Zuckerman Institute to reshape brain science in ways that would lead to effective treatment and prevention of psychiatric and neurological disorders. To me, this should be its main challenge and the measure of its ultimate success. So, as I said, without question, there have been really astonishing, stunning changes in brain science in the past decade or two. We've learned, for example, what can go wrong at the molecular level, at the cellular level, at the systems level. And we've developed new tools and new technologies to help us probe these processes in psychiatric and neurological disorders. For sure, we've demonstrated, we've proved that these conditions are disorders of the brain, something that was really widely questioned not very long ago, that they're hereditable, meaning that genes play a critical role, and that environmental factors, biology, psychological, sociological, influence whether, when, and how they become manifest. But as I said, this knowledge, this critical mass of knowledge, has simply not been translated into treatments that work. And again, we're not talking about rare conditions here. And so we're thinking about disorders with significant public health impact. 1 in 8 Americans over the age of 65 has Alzheimer's disease. That's more than 5 million. And that number is expected to triple by mid-century, owing to the aging of the US population. 2.5 million Americans have schizophrenia. 1 in 17 Americans is diagnosed with what we call a serious mental illness, conditions that include schizophrenia, manic depressive illness, obsessive compulsive disorder. These are illnesses that are often first manifest in adolescence or young adulthood. So just imagine the lifelong burden that they place, the suffering that they cause throughout the lives of these individuals and their families. And despite progress in treatment, the fact is that major depressive disorder itself remains the leading cause of disability in the US and in Canada. So for me, it's encouraging that with NBBI, with the Zuckerman Institute, we will train a new breed of scientist as comfortable in the laboratory as he or she is in the research clinic. A scientist who can literally move between these two settings to define therapeutic research strategies in a manner that best integrates what we know from both. And it's also encouraging to me that with NBBI, we'll create these bridges once and for all between psychology and psychiatry, between radiology and biomedical engineering, between neurology and psychiatry. And so maybe these approaches will be enough. But I'm skeptical, and I think we should all be skeptical. More likely, entirely new strategies and new paradigms will be necessary for us to crack this nut, as it was suggested before, and no pun intended. So it's especially encouraging to me to consider that NBBI will make progress, possibly by fostering the development of this new multidisciplinary brain science, a new intellectual culture, as people have been referring to here, brought about through the simple co-location and collaboration of the many scholars here at the university devoted to the question of mind, brain, and behavior. So getting back to my patient, let's work towards that day, and I think Z-Day is the beginning of that work, when the answers to her parents' questions are simple. Yes, she has schizophrenia, but that's something that we know how to treat. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So, The Zuckerman Institute is a few hours old, and by that very fact is a work in progress. And so you've heard 6 reflections in this multifaceted beast that we're trying to create. That's not to mean that we think we understand and know how to do this. So this is an invitation to all of you to think about what the prospect of the Zuckerman Institute can achieve, and don't be shy about letting us know what you think this should be. It's still in a process in which it can be shaped. And one way of representing that is that we've thought that the panel might engage in answering questions that have come from members of the audience here as you've been listening to this. And so we have a few questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions. And I've got all sorts of prompts here about what to do. So the first question, which is actually pre-arranged, is a question from 2 Columbia College seniors who've been engaged in neuroscience from this undergraduate perspective. Samara Bliss and Sarah Rosenberg. Samara and Sarah, stand up so that you can be identified. So this is the future of neuroscience and the Zuckerman Institute in one way, nothing to do with what's up here. And so what they're interested in is, given the dispersity and the diversity of neuroscience, how do you create, from the perspective of a Columbia freshman, a unified discipline? So there's a sort of strategic series of courses that someone interested in this can try and immerse themselves in. So this is a little bit different from what we've talking about, but in the end, there's no point in understanding all of this information about the brain unless you can disseminate that to the future generations that will be interested. So here we're just going to open it up, and anybody who wants to articulate a view on how to capture the science of the Zuckerman Institute and turn that into a core Columbia curriculum and present a sense of unity.
I think I should address that so that we get off the hook. The clearest way to do that is to take clearly the most incisive neuroscientist, the oldest and most experienced member of our faculty, and a man who has recently dubbed himself a neuro-entertainer. And we ask Eric, from the perspective of neuroscience and the arts, to teach such a course.
Eric has put us to shame by lecturing in the frontiers of science, which I'm not sure that any of the rest of us have done. So, Geraldine, do you want to?
In the psychology department, who, with our colleagues in biology, currently provide for the multitudes of undergraduates who are interested in neurobiology and behavior, and also in psychology, would welcome Eric's presence in our classroom. As we're thinking in the psychology department about what this means for us and how we can best serve what are the 2 most the majors that are growing the fastest. We've been thinking about renaming at least one of our majors, Mind, Brain and Behavior. And it's extraordinarily exciting for us to know that the neuroscientists are going to come closer to the Morningside campus and will be participating in the education of our students and also providing opportunities in their labs for our students to do the extraordinary research.
I actually think that the Mind, Brain, Behavior Initiative that Mort has started provides a fantastic opportunity for faculty that have been primarily teaching medical students to become more deeply involved in the university. And I just want to give you a personal experience. I've always immensely enjoyed teaching because I feel I understand things better when I explain it to myself and to others. And when I came to Columbia and started to teach the medical students, we reorganized the course. We went from understanding cells to understanding psychiatric illnesses and neurological illnesses. So we spanned the whole spectrum of neuroscience. And I noticed that the students are spending all the time writing rather than enjoying the lectures, rather than listening to a symphony. And I said to myself, we should put a syllabus together so the students don't have to work so hard doing the lecture, just scribbling things down. And after a while, that syllabus became so good that we made a textbook out of it, Principles of Neuroscience. And as Mort can testify, this now in its 5th edition, which he owns, is the heaviest, most expensive, but generally considered the best textbook in the country. I think that book is not what you're asking about, but you can take components of that book. We need a family of courses at different levels, addressing at a very high abstract level the kinds of issues that Richard is addressing. What is the nature of the neural code in the brain that gives rise to our feelings and our emotion, but also beginning on a cellular level, explaining how nerve cells function, because this is a major accomplishment of neuroscience, to understand how the components work. So I think that the Mind-Brain Behavior Initiative can be involved, not just doing powerful research, but also having an influence in the development of the curriculum.
Thank you, Eric. I want to make sure we have at least 2 or 3 questions. So here's one which maybe I can ask each of you, and you have 30 seconds to answer. This comes from Morgan Firestein from Columbia College. What's the greatest discovery would you predict in your field in the next 10 years, and how will access to the interdisciplinary science of the Institute facilitate the discovery? David, we're going to start this way. 30 seconds.
The greatest discovery. What will be the greatest
Yeah,
discovery?
predictions of the future in 10 years.
Well, I think that's hard to say. I'm going to dodge that question a little bit, but I think that the greatest discovery, as I said before, is going to come in our understanding the way that neural networks are at play in bringing about the kinds of disruptions that we see in some of the major psychiatric disorders. So we've made superb advances. We've created sophisticated animal models to track these changes. And so I think the discovery that we will be talking about are ways to predict who at risk for certain mental illnesses will develop them.
Thanks. Geraldine.
I think for psychology, what will be truly important is understanding how genes interact with the environment to shape the development of the brain and the resilience that some brains develop and others don't as we progress through our life.
I think the deepest question needs to be addressed is the logic of neural circuitry. But I want to point out a simpler problem, which I think we can address in the next 5 or 10 years. We're beginning to understand the neural circuitry of certain complex psychiatric disorders. For example, with post-traumatic stress disorder, we have a very good understanding of the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus being critically involved. Those are really nodal points. I think we can, in the next 5 or 10 years, really identify many, many additional components of this. And what is remarkable is once you have markers for mental illness, you can really begin to evaluate outcome in a way that wasn't possible before. And one of the really gratifying things that has emerged from this is the efficacy of psychotherapy can be shown on a biological level. You can show that certain abnormalities in the brain, for example, hyperactivity of an area called Area 25, will reverse if and only if the patient responds to psychotherapy. So to have an objective way of evaluating different kinds of psychotherapy, I think is on the horizon. In the first 10 years of the Zuckerman Institute, either that institute or institutes inspired by it should be able to solve that problem.
So I think from my perspective, it's this idea of really trying to understand and measure everything. And I think of it a little bit as if we're trying to reverse engineer a computer. You know, a computer just seems so complex when you look at it from the outside, and you have to try and figure out what's going on and how it works. Well, we have people who design computer chips. They actually know how a Pentium processor works. They develop algorithms that actually compress data and represent it. I think if we have deeper integration of those expertise, those kinds of new ways of thinking into neuroscience, I think a lot of those ideas might come across and translate and might really provide new insight into the way that the brain's working.
Richard, we actually have column mics, so we don't think we need that mic. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I've already described what I feel is an important enigma, and that is how it is that a distributive ensemble of active cells in a brain actually acquire meaning of such profundity. I really would like to see that solved. I do believe, however, that we can have more modest intellectual, but perhaps more important clinical goals, and that is our understanding of the biology of a neuron is quite successful. And we can now implicate genes and processes as responsible for the degeneration of neurons in a variety of important psychiatric and neurologic diseases, as David has pointed out, the classic example being Alzheimer's disease. Those neurons die, and I think the next 10 years might see a significant pharmacologic intervention without us understanding why it is that the degeneration, the disruption of cellular processes lead to the complex symptoms we observe. So for the first time today, I will say I'm hopeful.
Ken.
This may surprise you, but even as a surgeon, I would like to see us make some progress in understanding judgment. Judgment in taking care of patients is applauded when it's well done and maybe disastrous when it's not so. And we sometimes rationalize that it's stored experience, special expertise, and many other things, but we don't really understand judgment, and therefore it's often difficult to pass it on to the next generation. And I think that's a challenge that I hope we can make some progress in this institute.
So we have time, I think, just for one last question. This comes from Jorge Morales in the philosophy department. And so in all this, I'm paraphrasing here, in all this big talk about mind and brain, philosophy has been mentioned, but are there actually plans to include philosophy as a component of what the Institute is trying to achieve, or other humanities like history? Maybe I'll take this on to try and justify my existence up here with my esteemed colleagues. And so the answer is yes in both cases. In history, actually, we have something to report already, that what you've done, Mort, is begin dialogues across schools and departments within the university. And so we're discussing with Pamela Smith, the chair of the history department at the moment, who's in the middle of establishing a center for the history of science, because history, in a sense, is the reflection of memory and actions taken upon that memory in its ideal way. And so how can understanding brain and mind engage effectively in those sorts of endeavors? These are not easy challenges, because I think one of the other things that we're trying to achieve in the Institute is to have a series of measurable outcomes in relatively brief periods of time. So how do you take some of these issues about the relationship between the philosophy of mind and the neuroscience of mind and build a small program initially that has something that after a few years can be seen to have achieved something? So the answer to the question is yes, this is what we're trying to do in the far reaches of the Institute, and there are many, many challenges. So Mort, I would just like to end this sort of set of considerations and reflections just to point out that you have started something here today which is going to brew and ferment over the years and decades in a way that I think none of us here today can quite anticipate the outcome. But everybody up here on this stage, I hope you've sensed the enthusiasm and the excitement and the sense of appreciation of this endorsement that you've given us as a university, and we're very, very much in your debt for this. Thank you so much.
So there's no initiative I can think of that's more exciting, certainly that I've been associated with. And Mort, we're just thrilled to have you as our partner in this venture. So that concludes today. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And now we need to get back to work. Thanks a lot.